Have you ever wondered whether the problems in the world today would exist if we had deeper connection to ourselves, others, and the environment, and acted from that place?
Welcome to the Conscious Action Podcast with your hosts Brian Berneman and Kayla Greenville, who believe that connection is the key to taking conscious action as individuals and creating a better world.
We are here to raise awareness and inspire meaningful action by sharing stories, knowledge, and conversations with thought leaders and change makers.
From sustainability to well-being and everything related to conscious living, our mission is to empower you to be the change that you want to see in the world. Welcome everyone to a new episode of the Conscious Action Podcast. I am Brian Berneman, your host. And for this episode, I have the pleasure to be joined by Chester Santos, all the way from California, the US. As I do with all of our guests, I'm going to ask you, Chester, to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and what are the things, a little bit of what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, so my name is Chester Santos, also known as the International Man of Memory. I won the United States National Memory Championship, and since winning that competition, I've gone on to spend the last 13 plus years giving speeches and presentations all over the world. It's been now in more than 30 different countries on how anyone can develop powerful memory skills and use those skills to become more successful in one's career, personal life, and also if you happen to have any kids or grandkids in school, some of what we talk about today, memory skills development, will be useful there as well.
Wonderful. And once again, Chester, thank you so much for being here, for joining us. And I would love for you to share a little bit about, and this, we talked about this in the past already, but share a little bit for our listeners. How did you get into it? How did you notice? Did you have an amazing memory? Were you a child prodigy, or how did it go?
Yeah, so it was pretty random, really, how I ended up becoming interested in competing in the US Memory Championship and how I ended up where I'm at now. I was just flipping channels one night. This was way back in the year 2000. I just happened to be flipping channels and I caught a segment on ABC's 2020. It's a very popular evening news show in the United States. They had a segment on this United States Memory Championship, and it just caught my interest because growing up, I would often just get the comment from people. People would often say to me, Chester, wow, you have a really good memory. So with those comments kind of just in the back of my mind, when I caught that episode on TV, I thought, hey, people say I have a good memory. Maybe I can do well in this national memory competition. But I quickly found out when I looked into what the best people in the United States were scoring in these competitions and the various events, memorizing decks of playing cards, hundreds of digits, hundreds of names perfectly in just a few minutes. Mm-hmm. I quickly realized that although I probably was above average to start out with, I wasn't on that level. Mm-hmm. So that's when I started doing research. I wanted to, if I was going to compete, I wanted to do well. So I started doing research. All right, how can I improve my memory from where it's currently at? Based on that research, I started playing around with different techniques. I found what seemed to be working best for me personally, stuck to training myself in that small subset of techniques until eventually I was able to win the United States Memory Championship. And again, since then, I've been training people around the world in the small subset of techniques that I feel can help you out the most right away in your career, personal life, for personal development and to help out kids in school.
Yes, definitely. And that's amazing. It's just a random thing. If you imagine if you weren't watching that TV show, where would your life be right now?
Exactly. My life would be completely different if I hadn't flipped to that channel at that moment. So it's pretty crazy to think about that. It really is kind of crazy to think about that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I wanted to touch on this episode with you is that, and I have my own view, and I would love for your point of view as well. Is I think that we all have capabilities that we are not in touch with. So that the power of our mind is amazing, yet we are not fully making the most out of it. And of course, not everyone's mind is the same, and not everyone is going to have the same capabilities. But I think that there's a lot of untapped power that we are not getting in. Would you say that that's true?
Oh, it's undoubtedly true. I believe that to be the case 100%. So, I mean, that's really what I'm all about, specifically in terms of memory. My area is I really help people to realize that they're capable of doing extraordinary things with their memory if they will just learn the right techniques, the right approach, basically enough they'll put in just a little bit of training and practice. So you will tap into those what tend to be unused areas of the brain. But, you know, this doesn't just apply to memory. I think there are extraordinary capabilities that we can unlock in other areas as well. It just happens to be that mine specifically is memory, but probably we have untapped mathematical ability. Probably we have untapped, creative juices that creative juices we're not tapping into. I would guess that there are probably some techniques you can learn to help you in other areas that are going to unlock this hidden potential as well.
Definitely. And I think that, it's interesting because I was actually 2 days ago, someone was asking my friend for her phone number, and she couldn't remember it. And I was telling her, I remember the time when I was a kid, and I knew the numbers of all of my friends, everyone from my family, because I didn't have my smartphone. I actually had to remember it. Of course, I had the notebook with all of the numbers, and I was thinking, I don't even know one person's number now.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I talk about that sometimes in my presentations to demonstrate the use it or lose it principle as it applies to memory. So, we all used to be able to remember the phone numbers as you described of so many friends, family members. I remember growing up, my parents would give me emergency numbers that they thought were important for me to know in case of an emergency. We could all do that, right? But nowadays, it's kind of scary that you give somebody even one phone number and they can't do it. And then it's getting so bad that there are a lot of people out there nowadays that don't even know their own phone number. So it's a really good example of the use it or lose it principle. Now, some people might say, well, okay, we don't need to remember phone numbers because we do have the phone to help us. That is true. However, isn't it scary that when presented now with even one number, people feel very handicapped? They feel like they no longer have the ability, that mental power to even commit one number to memory. I think it's really good way to demonstrate. When we look at that, it demonstrates the danger a bit in this digital dependency. Another example I like to give related to that, to illustrate this digital dependency, is also navigation. So we've become overly dependent, I think, on the GPS. I think, things like the phone to remember numbers and the GPS to help you navigate, it's good if we use it just as a useful, helpful tool, but there's a danger in completely turning off your brain. So you have people, for instance, that are driving Uber and Lyft. This is not at all to signal them out, and it doesn't apply to all Uber and Lyft drivers, of course. But I mean, I have been in an Uber where something's wrong with the network connection in that location, or something's wrong with the app. You either have to drive around until they can catch a signal, or they have to restart their phone a bunch of times until eventually the issue with the app resolves itself. Even if they've already been driving in that city for 5+ years, they haven't even learned a few basic landmarks in the city that everybody should know how to get there. So it's another good example, I think, of what happens when you shut off your brain. There is a danger in this digital dependency.
That's so interesting. And, in the past, I've talked to a lot of people about the power of technology, because technology is amazing, yet as you just pointed out, there's certain aspects of our use of it. It's not the technology itself, it's our use of it that could be really good and useful, or could actually be a hindrance, as you mentioned. If I don't even know, and I've seen this, people just going from the same place that they go. Like they go to work every day to the same place, and they still use like the map on their phones. And it's like,
Yeah.
this is incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a little scary to me. So, I've even been a speaker at tech conferences on occasion. So I always acknowledge the power of technology, and it's really incredible what it helps us to accomplish. It does help us to be more productive and in various ways. But at the same time, I want for us to remember that all of this technology, everything that we have, it's all come from the power of the human mind, right? The human mind created all of this. So let us not neglect that brain power. Let's not let our brains just wither and die, right? The various mental capabilities that we have. So I say use technology when it's useful, but be aware that if you're not using your brain at all, you're going to lose certain abilities over time. It's going to happen.
Yes, definitely. And I'm lucky enough that I grew up, and as I was growing up, I went to a school that was trilingual. So I know that, and also not only from my own experience, but from a neuroscientific perspective, the more languages that I learned, the more neural pathways I had activated for everything that happened in life, which meant that my brain had more practice and was more malleable when things were happening. And as I haven't practiced some of these languages, I noticed that now I can't hold the conversation in some of these languages, a basic conversation, even though I used to be fluent.
Yeah.
And even with Spanish, I actually, like, I grew up in Argentina. Spanish is my mother tongue, and I noticed that a few times when I'm on the phone with some of my family members, I'm like, how did you say this in Spanish? And it's like, wow, this is incredible. And it's part of what you were just mentioning about the use it or lose it, or the power of practicing. I wonder if you can explore a little bit more into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically as it sounds, use it or lose it. If we don't use something, reinforce those pathways, they're going to really wither away. Just to hit on something there that you mentioned, the languages, this is actually one of the best ways that learning languages is one of the best ways that scientists say you can build up what's called a cognitive reserve. So if people want to Google or look it up later, cognitive reserve is the terminology that you're going to find used over and over in the research. This basically means building up some extra brain muscle. And although no scientist, no doctor can tell you how to prevent yourself from getting Alzheimer's or any other form of dementia, no one can tell you how to prevent it from happening, but they think you might be more resistant if you build up this extra brain muscle, this extra cognitive reserve. One of the top ways is learning foreign languages, because you're really exercising your brain. You're building all of those extra pathways, but you do need to keep practicing, or else, even those new pathways are going to start to die off.
Yes, definitely. And it's just like any new habit, we need to reinforce it, and we need to keep on going, because, just from a neuron pathway perspective, like the neurons are like the electricity is just going to go and try to find the pathways that have more fat, the ones that have been used the most. So all of the new ones actually need to be used actively to make sure that it goes that way. And I wonder, Chester, if you would be able to share a little bit for those that don't think that they have a good memory or that can't remember anything. What can they start doing to actually change that?
Yeah, so I firmly believe that anyone and everyone out there is capable of really developing powerful memory skills. It's just learning the right approach, practicing a bit. Let me quickly go over 3 overarching principles that are going to apply no matter what memory technique you end up using. And then hopefully we can go through a quick exercise. If you're up for it, I'm going to put you a bit on the spot, and people that listen to this later can follow along and see how they do with the exercise. But first, let me cover the 3 principles that memory champions like myself use that really anybody can learn. One, take the information, whatever it is you want to remember, turn it into something that you can picture in your mind, something that you can see, okay? We're very good at remembering things that we see. So a quick example, let's say you go to a party, Brian, you're at a party, you're meeting a lot of new people, all right? 2 weeks after that party's over, you're talking with one of your friends that was there, and your friend says, hey, Brian, do you remember that attorney that we met a couple weeks ago? He was at the party with us. As your friend describes to you the person, a lot of times you can picture exactly who they're talking about. Obviously, your friend can picture who they're describing to you, right? But a lot of times, neither one of you can manage to remember that person's name. And it's really frustrating, right? So why does this happen? Well, we tend to be pretty good at remembering what people look like, right? Their face, we can call up into our mind an image of what they look like, because when we're meeting them or interacting with people in various ways, we see the face, right? It's recorded into our visual memory, but the name is something much more abstract to the brain. So one way to get better at names, I turn them into visuals. So if I meet someone named Mike, I might picture a microphone because that would remind me of the name Mike. If I meet someone named Alice, I might picture a white rabbit because that reminds me of Alice in Wonderland. All right. So really, I was going over that to just illustrate the power of visuals because that's the first principle. If you can picture something, it's easier to remember. Second principle is try to involve more and more senses as you can from there, because when you activate more senses, you're activating more areas of your brain and you're building more and more connections in your mind to the information. So at one point I started in this, we have a popular show in the United States. It's the longest running science show in US history. It's called PBS Nova Science. So I started an episode. If people want to look it up online later, they can watch it. It was called How Smart Can We Get on PBS Nova Science, or just Google my name and PBS. But anyway, I performed some memory feats. Then I trained David Pogue. People might know him from the technology industry. He's a correspondent for CBS News and also the New York Times. I trained him, and he was able to perform some pretty cool memory feats after just a little bit of training. Next, they had some brain scientists, neuroscientists come on the show and explain for everybody watching at home on TV, okay, how was Chester able to perform those crazy memory feats? How in the world did David Pogue do it just after just a tiny bit of training from Chester? And the brain scientists confirmed that it's because with these techniques that I've learned over the years and that we'll talk about today during the interview, we're recruiting extra areas of the brain that most people never use when trying to commit things to memory. With these techniques, we're using more of the brain to help us. And part of this is learning to use more senses when you're encoding the information so that you're activating more of the brain. So that's the second principle, involve as many senses as you can. Third and final principle, while you are seeing and experiencing all of this in your mind, make it weird, unusual, extraordinary, to take advantage of the psychological aspect to human memory. So there's a psychological aspect to memory. If right now, in the room that you're in, Brian, if an elephant crashed into your room at this moment and it started to spray water on you with its trunk, that actually happened right now, you would probably remember that for the rest of your life. Even 40 years from now, you at dinner one night, you would be telling people, you will never believe this. 40 years ago, I had this guy on my podcast and we were doing the interview. I kid you not, an elephant just crashed into the room. It was insane. It might be stuck in your memory forever without you even trying to commit it to memory, right? Now, although nobody fully understands how that works in the brain, how is it that, sometimes in one instant, something's going to go straight into long-term memory, whereas other times we might spend weeks, months trying to get important, like training material, exam material, maybe it's presentations. We try to get it into long-term memory, but we can't do it, right? Whereas in 1 second, something like the elephant crashing in the room, it stays there forever. Now, although nobody understands how it works, just realizing that there is that aspect to human memory, that psychological aspect, we can harness it, we can take advantage of that, and we can apply it to things that would be very useful to remember. Names to get more out of networking, presentations to be a more effective, persuasive speaker, training material. There are a lot of obviously practical benefits, practical uses for remembering things. So that's it. Those are the three principles. I think pretty easy, really, to put it in practice. Visuals, first, additional senses if you can, and while you're doing that, make it weird, unusual, extraordinary. And once you understand that those are going to be useful, you can start to use them with various techniques, and I think people will be amazed at how easy it is to remember.
Beautiful. And as you're saying this, there's a lot of those things that I have already incorporated because of other practices that I do. But actually, one of the things that I noticed with the last one that you mentioned is that almost every single person that I talked to, and of course this was true, especially when I was living in the US, everybody remembered where they were and what they were doing, what they were wearing when 9/11 happened, and some of these big events. Like everybody remembers that, even as you say, even if they weren't actively trying to remember, there was something so different, so shocking, so wild that they remember it. And before we get to the exercise that I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes, what is the difference for you between information in terms of knowledge and wisdom?
Yeah, the difference between knowledge and wisdom. So I guess knowledge is really the facts, the figures, information, right? This is the knowledge, but the wisdom, I believe, comes from synthesizing that knowledge, understanding it, taking advantage of that knowledge in some way, making it useful to you. I think that is where wisdom comes from. So I think they kind of go together. You need to have the knowledge to end up in the end with wisdom, but probably just having the knowledge doesn't necessarily result in the wisdom. You really need to take the time to try and understand, process it, and then even put this to use, put the knowledge to use in some way to where it becomes, I think, wisdom.
I remember, I totally agree with that. I remember when I was at school, and some of my classmates, they were really good memorizing stuff. But as soon as the teacher asked them to put that into like something slightly different, it was like, whoa, like that wasn't in the book. It's kind of like they couldn't understand it. And I think that it's, as you say, like remembering or memory and that knowledge is the first step, of course, for that wisdom. And okay, let's get Chester into the exercise. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So just to clarify that point. So knowledge isn't enough. It doesn't necessarily lead to understanding, but I think that it is an important part of it. So it's a fundamental part of the learning process, but it's up to you to then, synthesize it, really get to that understanding. Let's get to an exercise now, which is going to help people to develop their memory skills. And it's going to be useful in so many different ways. Part of it will be adding to your knowledge base. So I'm going to have you quickly commit to memory, Brian, the following random list of words. It's going to be monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, and dollar. So it's a pretty long list there. How most people would approach this, how most people would approach this is they would just write that list out over and over again, right? They would read it over and over or recite it to themselves over and over until they feel that it's, been drilled into their head. When you do things like that, you're really not making the most efficient use of the brain. If people manage to get into their memory, it's only in the very short term, right? And people, when they go about things in that way, rote memorization, they find it to be very difficult, boring. So we're instead going to use those three principles that I talked about earlier. We're going to keep those in mind, and I'm going to guide you through a story, a visual story. So I'll guide you through visuals. You'll just see and experience this happening in your mind. And everybody that listens or sees this podcast later, I encourage them to try and follow along to see how they do. For now, we're talking about random words, but I promise that I will get into practical applications for business and, personal development later on. So the first word was monkey. So I want for you to visualize a monkey. That's it. See this monkey in your mind, but make sure that it's dancing around or something. It's making monkey noises, whoop, 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 whatever a monkey would sound like. Just see and hear the monkey. Try to vividly experience this in your mind. The monkey now picks up a gigantic iron, maybe like you would iron your clothes with, because that was the next word I gave you, iron. So just visualize that. The monkey is dancing around with this giant iron. The iron starts to fall, but a rope attaches itself to the iron. Maybe even feel the rope. Maybe it feels sort of rough. Really interact with that rope. You look up the rope, you see that the other end of the rope is attached to a kite. It's flying around. Maybe you try and reach up and touch that kite there. The kite now you see crashes into the side of a house. Do your best to actually visualize that happening in your mind. See that house. The house, you notice, is completely covered in paper. It's completely covered in paper for some strange reason. Picture that paper. A shoe appears out of nowhere now. It starts to walk all over the paper. Maybe it's messing it up as it's walking on it, that shoe. The shoe smells pretty badly, so you decide to investigate and see why. You look inside of the shoe and you find a smelly worm crawling around inside of that shoe. Really see that smelly worm was the next word, worm, all right? The worm now jumps out of the shoe and into an envelope or envelope. Maybe it's going to mail itself or something, I don't know, but envelope was the next word. Out of thin air, magically a pencil appears and it starts to write very quickly all over the envelope. Maybe it's addressing it, that pencil. The pencil now jumps into a river and there's a huge splash like you would never expect to see when that little pencil hits the river. The river, you notice, is crashing up against a giant rock. That rock flies out of the river and it crashes into a tree. Really see that tree in your mind. The tree is growing cheese. You probably haven't ever seen a tree like that. This one's growing cheese. And out of the cheese comes a dollar. Maybe see a weird looking dollar come out of the cheese. Last word I had given you was dollar, okay? Now, some people may already know this, but I'm going to run through this again in about 20 seconds. And your job is to simply replay through this little story that you've created in your mind. So we start off with a monkey. Ask yourself, what was that monkey dancing around with? It was an iron. What then attached to the iron? It was a rope. The other end of the rope was attached to what? It was attached to a kite. What did the kite crash into? It crashed into a house. The house was covered in paper. What walked on the paper? It was a shoe. What was crawling in the shoe? It was a worm. The worm jumped into the envelope. What wrote on the envelope? It was a pencil. The pencil jumped into the river. The river was crashing up against the rock. That flew into a tree. What was that tree growing? It was growing cheese. And what came out? A dollar. So now you should be able to, Brian, pretty easily, I think, recite for me the entire list of random words by simply playing through the story in your mind. Each major object that you see in the story will give you the next word. So take your time, give it a try, and people can see, they can follow along and see how well they do. Go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you for putting me on the spot here. Okay, so we have monkey, iron, rope, kite, house, paper, shoe, worm, envelope, pencil, river, rock, tree, cheese, dollar.
100% correct. 100%.
Yes.
Awesome job. Awesome job there. And I just sprung that on you in the middle of an interview. So a lot of pressure. Good job. But the bad news is that you did so well with that, Brian, that I'm going to ask you to attempt to do this now in reverse. So see if you can list off all of the random words backwards by simply going through the story in reverse. And again, people can follow along and see how well they do.
Awesome. So we have dollar, cheese, tree, rock, river, pencil, envelope, worm, shoe, paper, house, kite, rope, iron, monkey.
100% backwards even. Very well done.
Yes.
And I'm sure that, yeah, great job, man. Great job. And I'm sure that your listeners, if they didn't get 100%, they probably got close to 100% correct there. So that technique is simply called the story method. It's one of many techniques that memory champions like myself use to pull off what might seem at first like extraordinary feats of memory. So they've had me over the years on a lot of different TV shows, Science Channel, Discovery Channel, a bunch of news programs. Most recently, it was BBC World News. They'll have me come do a memory feat and then give tips for viewers at home as to how they can improve their own ability to remember things. But I want to make it really clear for your audience that there's nothing different about my brain compared to everyone else's. I've just learned these types of techniques that are very powerful and effective. I've put in a little bit of training and practice. Now, we covered right there, it's random words, but this can be applied to anything at all, even very complex types of information. I was a speaker over at Harvard University. If anybody goes to my website later, they'll see a testimonial from the Harvard Graduate Council. I worked with the law students, medical students, business students. So it's just about building mental note cards, all right? So that monkey can represent something else, something a little bit broader. Let me just quickly talk about how I would apply this to a presentation, for instance, to give you an idea of what I mean by mental note cards. So let's say I were going to give a speech or presentation about healthcare in the United States, always a huge topic for discussion over here in the US. I might start off my story with an image of a stethoscope that the doctor uses to check your heartbeat. That's just going to remind me the broad topic is healthcare. First thing I want to hit on in my presentation, talk about to the audience, is the high cost of healthcare in the United States. So maybe shooting out of the stethoscope are a bunch of $100 bills, all right? Next thing I want to hit on, next talking point, is that under current healthcare programs, in order for us to get certain things covered, we have to find a way to navigate through or cut through a lot of red tape. So maybe wrapping itself around the $100 bills is all of this red tape. So I think that should give people an idea of how you could perhaps outline a presentation, outline all of the major points, subpoints, and then use images to help guide you. So you can at least minimize the amount of notes you use so that you're a more effective and persuasive speaker, maintaining eye contact with your audience rather than shifting through a lot of notes. This could be, maybe not a presentation, but you're meeting with clients, potential clients for, entrepreneurs and business. Here are 5-10 key things I learned about you and your company in my research. Here are 5-10 key things I learned about you and your competitors. Here are 5 ways as to how myself and my services can benefit you in your business. When you're able to do that, maintain eye contact with a person, demonstrate that you actually have this knowledge, right? Expertise. People have a lot of confidence in you and your abilities. And as we talked about in today's world, people are very dependent on these digital devices. So when you can demonstrate that you have some memory skills, suddenly you become much more memorable in the business world as well.
Beautiful. And Chester, I'm now curious on when we use this, I think that the correct word is mnemonic cues, right? When we use this, or when you use them, would you always attach something that really visually relates to it, or could it be just a random attachment that for you actually means something?
Yeah, so this is a mnemonic, as you were saying. Mnemonic techniques, really any sort of memory aid is considered a mnemonic. These are advanced mnemonic techniques. It's going to be whatever would remind you personally of that data point, of that piece of information. So it's going to serve as a mental note card for you. So even if it wouldn't make sense to anybody else, as long as it makes sense to you to remind you of that piece of information, that's the type of image you want to use. So, and there are always different ways as to how to go about it. So in the case of names, for instance, if I were trying to commit to memory the name Jane, I might use a chain as the visual cue. So in that case, it's sort of a sound alike. But in other cases, like I listed the white rabbit to remind me of Alice, it's more of a symbolic connection, right? So there are various ways as to how the imagery can remind you of what you want to remember. But it's, really whatever is going to make sense to help you as a mental note card.
And just with that, as you were saying, like, let's say I'm going to a networking event and I'm meeting a person. Would you, in the moment that you're meeting them, perhaps shaking their hand, it's in that moment that you're bringing this tool into your mind?
Yeah, so I do it somewhere during a 4-step process. I'll quickly go over these 4 steps that I recommend for people to use when they're meeting people. And again, as I go through these in my mind, I'm taking that time to come up with the image. So step number 1, whenever you're introduced to someone, just get into the habit of immediately repeating their name. So it probably seems pretty obvious, but a lot of times when people are introducing themselves to us, our mind is all over the place. We're thinking about all sorts of other things. We don't pay any attention to the name. So step 1 is, if you meet someone named John, just nice to meet you, John, or pleased to meet you, John. That's it. You have to pay attention for at least 1 second in order to repeat the name back to the person, right? So start doing that. Eventually it's going to become a habit. You'll find that you're automatically doing it. All right. Step number 2, early on in your interaction, ask them just one question using their name. That's it. So John, how do you know Chester? Or John, how long have you been with this organization? That's it. Just use it once early on. I want to clarify. I don't mean use the name over and over in the conversation to where it starts to seem a little bit weird, maybe. Really, just using it once is enough to reinforce it in your mind, okay? Step number 3, take a few seconds or less to think of a connection between the person's name and literally anything at all that you already know. So John, maybe think of John Lennon, or maybe John is a character from a TV show or movie that you like. But it could be something as simple as you have a friend or family member that has that same name. For instance, I have an uncle, John, So thinking of a connection between the name and literally anything at all that you already know really helps that name to stick better in your mind. And I think in that 3rd step, that's also probably a really good opportunity to come up with your image as well. And then step 4, whenever you leave the party, the meeting, whatever type of function it might be, make it a point to actually say goodbye to people using the name. So, I hope to see you again sometime, John. And if at that point you've forgotten the name, ask them their name again right then and there. Because at that point, they're not as likely to be offended because they might not expect you to know the name yet. I think at that point, they're much more likely to really appreciate the fact that you care enough to get their name right? And to know it the next time you see them. So you're expressing interest in the person, and they really appreciate that. So those 4 steps are really going to help people out. They'll give you that opportunity to come up with your image. And really, there is one extra step to this. If you can, connect that image to something unique about the person's look. So, if I think that Alice that I'm meeting has really cool or interesting looking hair, I might imagine that the white rabbit is getting tangled up in her hair. This is very powerful and very effective, because the next time you see someone that you previously met, all you have to do is ask yourself, what is unique to you about their look? What you personally noticed before is very likely what you personally are going to notice again. So you're likely to notice the hair again. You're going to, that image of the rabbit getting tangled up in the hair is going to come right back to you and remind you that the name was Alice. So if you can, I gave you a lot there, I think, in terms of names, but if you do manage to put that all together, there is no doubt in my mind at all that you will be better than ever at remembering people's names. You might not be 100%, even I'm not 100%, but if you can make a big improvement, this will pay huge dividends for you in your career and in your personal life. It adds to popularity, it adds to your likability factor. And of course, likability, affects how well we do in business and really in life.
Beautiful. So good. And I think that for a lot of people, actually, this is such an important aspect because as you mentioned, like in life and in business, a lot of times those little things actually make a huge difference. Definitely. Chester, a few last questions. The first one is there a book or a website that you would recommend for people to go and check out if they want to practice a little bit more on their memory skills?
Yeah, so definitely. I have, during the pandemic, tried to transition more to online, obviously, like a lot of businesses have. So I developed an entire online memory school that is going, if people enjoyed what we went through in this interview, it's an entire school. There's core training, advanced training. There are new videos uploaded every single month. For the ongoing training, I simulate introducing you to people, so you really develop the ability to remember names. I have you go through sample presentations. I teach you Korean, so you really apply this to languages, and I make it clear how you apply techniques to learning any language. And you'll learn how to memorize decks of playing cards, all sorts of cool, fun, interactive exercises. So people, I encourage you to go to memoryschool.net. I would visualize maybe a giant fishing net to remember that it's .net. So memoryschool.net is where people can go. And for your audience, I set up code CA for conscious action. I don't know how many people might be interested, but I did set it to 25 uses. So as long as you're one of the first 25 people to use code CA, what it should do is take there's a $200 enrollment fee. It should actually set that down to zero. Oh, wow. So it will completely wipe out the $200 enrollment fee. You'll only pay for the first month of access. That's it. And of course, it's a monthly access, so you can cancel at any time. When you develop your skills to where you're already a memory master, you can stop logging in at that point. But I definitely recommend people give it a try, at least for a few months. And again, code CA at memoryschool.net. You won't have to pay the initial enrollment fee.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with all of our audience. Another question that I wanted to ask you is, what is the one thing that you wish everyone in the world knew?
One thing that I wish everybody in the world knew. Oh man, that's a hard question to answer there. I'm not sure if this is what you were going for, but I'm just going to give one, maybe like a favorite quote that people might find, to help them out, I think, in various ways. And that is that you don't have to be great to start, but you do have to start to eventually become great at something. So that's one of my favorite quotes. It applies, not only to your memory, but it applies really to anything at all that you might want to improve upon, in terms of personal, professional development. Mm-hmm. If you'll just get started and, you're consistent, I think it is, I've just been really inspired by what I've seen people that I've worked with, the transformations that have taken place in their lives. And I love to see how surprised they are at how incredible they are at remembering things now. But it was just a matter of getting started. So that's a quote. And I think I want everybody to know that.
Wonderful. And I do think like similarly, and this is why with conscious action is such an important aspect, because if we don't act, then nothing changes. So it's a really important aspect. Chester, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. If people want to follow you on social media or keep on going, can you repeat once more your website and where can people find you?
Yeah, definitely. So for the training aspect, memoryschool.net, code CA for the first 25, no enrollment fee. Following me on social media, Instagram is where I actually post videos from all over the world. I think people might find it pretty interesting. I visit famous locations around the world and talk about how they relate to the brain and memory in some way. So Chester J. Santos on Instagram. And people can also find me on LinkedIn as well. Those are the places that I probably post most consistently. So please connect with me there.
Wonderful. And we'll have all of those links on the show notes so that everybody can access for it much easier. Thank you so much, Chester. It was wonderful. Thank you for putting me on the spot, because I actually enjoyed that exercise. It was actually really cool. I hope for everyone listening that you got something out of it. Go and check out the training at the school online. Make sure that you do that fast, because there's only 25 spots there. And if you learned something and something was interesting for you, let us know in the comments of the episode. That would be amazing. And we'll see you next time. Bye.
What did you like the most about this episode? Take a moment to think about what change you can make in your life today.
Share your conscious action on social media using #ConsciousAction and tagging @ConsciousActionNZ, so we can celebrate your impact on the world and create a ripple effect.
One easy action we would love for you to take right now is to share, like, and subscribe to this podcast. This will help us get these messages out into the world and inspire more people to take conscious action in their own lives, contributing to the better world we hope for.